Welcome to E.C.H.O No More, clear, credible, court-ready documentation in high-conflict parenting. No hype, no legal jargon, no drama. I'm Dr. James. If you're new here, I'm really glad you found this space. This podcast is for protective parents navigating high-conflict custody situations, especially when the other parent is manipulative, emotionally unsafe, or unpredictable. I'm not a lawyer, and this podcast isn't legal advice. What I am is a parent who has lived through this system, and someone whose attorneys over and over again told me the same thing. Your documentation is excellent. They told me it made their job easier. They told me it protected my credibility. And they told me it changed how my case was received. That's why I'm sharing this. Not to teach you how to fight, but how to document calmly, clearly, and in a way courts actually understand. This is parent to parent, calm, grounded, and focused on protecting your child without losing yourself. Up to this point in the podcast, we've spent a lot of time talking about why documentation feels so hard. We've talked about fear, about over-documenting, about regulation, about why calm matters more than passion on paper. Today we're going to talk about how. Because insight without structure doesn't actually help you when something happens and your nervous system is tired. What most parents are missing isn't effort or intelligence or care. What they're missing is a container. That's where the E.C.H.O method comes in. And I want to start by saying this clearly. I didn't invent this method because I'm clever. I named it because my attorneys kept pointing out the same 4 things over and over again that made my documentation usable. They never called it E.C.H.O. They just kept saying things like, "This is clear, this is easy to follow, this makes the pattern obvious." And when I looked closely at the entries they praised, they all had the same structure, even when they were short. They answered 4 questions the court always asks, whether consciously or not. What exists? When did it happen? How did it affect the child? And what happened next? That's it. Those 4 questions are the backbone of the E.C.H.O method. Evidence, chronology, harm, and outcome. This method is not about writing more. It's about writing with intention. And the reason it works so well for exhausted parents is because it removes decision-making. You no longer have to sit there thinking, what should I include? Am I saying too much? Am I missing something important? You just move through the structure. Let's slow this down and walk through it together. Not as a checklist, but as a way of thinking. We start with E in the E.C.H.O method. That stands for evidence. Evidence answers the simplest question, and the one parents often complicate the most. What objectively exists? Not what you believe, not what you suspect, not what you feel in your gut. What exists in a way that someone else could see, verify, or confirm? This might be a message, a missed exchange, a schedule change, a school email, an observed behavior. Evidence grounds documentation in reality. It keeps you out of interpretation and out of argument. And here is something important. Evidence does not have to be dramatic to be powerful. Often, the strongest evidence is boring. Next comes C in the E.C.H.O method. That one stands for chronology. Chronology answers the question, when did this happen and how often? This is where patterns are born. Chronology is not about perfect timestamps. It's about consistency, dates, time frames, order of events. Courts rely heavily on chronology because it allows them to see repetition without you explaining it. When you include chronology, you stop sounding reactive and start sounding observant. Then we move to the H in the E.C.H.O method. That letter stands for harm. This is where many parents either freeze or overreach. Harm is not about diagnosing. It's not about predicting future damage. It's not about assigning blame. Harm answers one question only. What was the observable impact on the child? Observable here means something another adult could notice, something that changed, something that affected functioning of the child. When harm is documented neutrally, it becomes visible without accusations. And finally, we have the O in the E.C.H.O method. That stands for outcome. Outcome is the most overlooked piece of documentation and one of the most important ones. Outcome answers what happened next. Was there a resolution? Did the issue repeat? Did a third party get involved? Did the child stabilize or escalate? Outcome closes the loop. Without outcome, documentation feels unfinished. With outcome, patterns become clear over time. Here's why the E.C.H.O method matters so much for parents in high conflict situations. It prevents two very common problems. The first is over-explaining. When you write without structure, it's easy to keep adding context, history, and emotions because you're trying to make sure the reader understands. E.C.H.O removes that urge. You don't need to explain, you just need to record. The second problem it prevents is under-documenting. Some parents swing the other way and write so little that nothing connects. E.C.H.O ensures that even short entries still contain what courts need. This method also supports regulation, because when you're dysregulated, decision-making is exhausting. E.C.H.O gives you rails to write on when you don't have the energy to think creatively or strategically. You don't have to wonder what tone to use. You don't have to debate whether something matters. You just ask 4 questions and stop. And that's important because knowing when to stop is just as critical as knowing what to include. I want to say something reassuring here. Using a method does not make your documentation cold or inhuman. It makes it usable. Your care for your child is not measured by how emotional your records are. It's measured by how clearly your records communicate what your child is experiencing over time. When my attorneys told me my documentation was excellent, what they were really saying was, "This is easy to trust." That's what the E.C.H.O method helps you build. Trust without pleading, clarity without over-explaining, credibility without emotional cost. Over the next few episodes, we are going to slow this down even more. We'll spend an entire episode on evidence, an entire episode on chronology, an entire episode on harm, and an entire episode on outcome. Not because this is complicated, but because repetition builds confidence. You don't need to master this all at once. You just need to start thinking this way. Before we close, I want to remind you of something important. You don't need to document everything, you don't need to be perfect, and you don't need to convince anyone with emotion. Calm documentation is power. If this episode helped you, you will find a full structured system in my guide, Clear, Credible, Court Ready. It's designed to support, not replace, your attorney. And if you want help turning everything you're documenting into something organized and usable, you can visit www.economocoaching.org to download my guide on how to create a clear, court-ready documentation binder. Take what helps, leave what doesn't, and most of all, take care of yourself. I'll see you next week.